You can see on the back it says the Bueller Roller Mill, and it was called the Silver Star. And it was made by a relative of mother's cousin, I think. But it's made back in the 1880s, probably.
Eileen Hooper made the pretty little purple and pink one there for Jade. Did she make it for you when you were born, sweetie? Do you remember how old you were? Oh, just last year. And the next quilt is Sue Furman's. Will Sue say a little bit about hers?
This quilt is called Over the River. It was done through the Naughty Girls Club at Dakota Quilt in Spearfish. We had to take the designs using a tracing box and draw the pattern on our piece of fabric, and then you embroidered each and every one. And to make it personalized, I put my husband and my initials up on the tree in the right-hand corner at the top. And on the barn at the bottom is my brother's brand. And it took me probably about 15 months to make it.
The next one belongs to Carol Sisk.
This quilt was inspired from when we lived in Alaska. I liked to pick the blueberries. And when we lived in Juneau, the bushes were very high. When we moved to Fairbanks, they were bog blueberries. So we were on hands and knees through the blueberry patch. On the back of one of the corners is a cut-out bear, and you would often see the bears in the blueberry patches. So it's my bearberry patch quilt.
And the next one is Joyce Harmson's.
This is a quilt my mother made. The pattern for the quilt was given, well, the embroidery patterns were given to my mother by her aunt, and she had acquired them through the Omaha World Herald. And there's a copy of the news article. It's dated 1931. My parents were married in 1939, so this was a project that my mom and dad did when they were first married. In fact, my dad embroidered the yucca plant, which is the New Mexico state flower, and I don't even know exactly where it's at, but he embroidered one of the blocks, and I'm not sure when my mom finished it. The interesting thing is that Dee Wilson has a quilt very similar to it, the same colors and the 48 state flowers that she got from Gibbs' mother, who had purchased it at a garage sale. So it was evidently a pretty popular quilt pattern at the time. My mother kept it in the cedar chest for years, and when she got ready to go to assisted living, I said, Mom, why don't you take the quilt that you and Dad made and put it on your bed? And so she did. And it was on her bed when she had a massive heart attack in September of 2002, and the EMTs wrapped her in the quilt and put her on the gurney with it. And she later passed away that afternoon, but she went to the hospital wrapped in this quilt. So it has a lot of meaning for me.
And where's Pat do that? Do you mind?
That quilt was made by the Bible school in 1991. I don't know what the theme was, that they have howling wolves and a cabin and some cactus on there. I can't remember. I was hoping Greta would be here because I'm sure she knows what it was. But the kids made the blocks, and then Betty Malloy's class put it together. And then they didn't know what to do with it, of course. And the interesting thing is it's got the names of so many of the kids on it. And it's interesting to look at the names and see what they're doing now and where they are now. I have a picture of Carrie, she's got a block, and of Chester. He was teaching Bible school that year. And Chester and Carrie are holding the quilt up. We had a church auction to raise some funds to build this addition on at that time. And they auctioned the quilt off at that auction. And I bought it, and I've had it all this time. So I thought it was very appropriate for him to have a quilt show and be able to show it.
Let's see, Sherry, is that little one yours?
Which one?
Well, Dave, you can tell.
There's not much story. My grandmother, Edna Morris, made that when I was about 5, 1955, about then. So it wasn't a baby quilt, it was a child's quilt. And when I saw that this afternoon, I said, I remember those cowboys.
Okay. The next two quilts belong to Marjorie Goodson. The little baby quilt has circus characters hand embroidered. And she likes to come into the pictures and look at some of the books in the library and for the designs for her embroidered quilts. But she said the pictures for this one are from the Christmas Ideals book. But I asked her who it was made for, and it was made for either Matt or Amy's first baby. I don't know how long it's going to be before the quilt gets passed on. They seem to be perfectly happy the way they are right now. This other quilt she calls her stained glass quilt, and you made it last year. She got the material from Eileen Hooper. A relative of Eileen's had bought the materials thinking she would make bibs and cut them out and decided it wouldn't work. So I guess Eileen took the fabric into a sorority meeting to see if they could use it for a project, and they didn't. So here it is in Marjorie's stained glass quilt. Linda Church hand quilted the stained glass. Pat was pointing out the hand quilting by Linda Church, and it has a really cool wave pattern design between the blocks.
This one was made by my mother probably in the early 1980s, and it was the very first quilt she ever made. And she had gone to a class, and they did a block each time. And she went guns fire after that and made lots and lots of quilts. And they were all upstairs, and I don't know how many there were, but we got to pick. And I was very fortunate when Mike and I got married that I got to pick, and when I found out that was her first one, that was the one I wanted. And my mom, I wish she could have been here, but she's in Phillip, and she's still alive, and she's 92, and she will never quilt again. But I'd like to point out that little quilt up in the corner, and I don't know who made that, but it reminds me of public health. There's a group of women in this community that make small quilts like that we give to new moms for their babies in the community. And I think that's a great community service, and it's a part of all these women in the community that go out to each of these new babies that we see. So that's pretty awesome, and I want to thank all the women that do that.
I'm not sure whose quilt this is right next to it.
Jill said bring a quilt with a story, so I thought this one kind of has a story to it. The flower block originated, several years back. There were a group of women that did some quilting here at the church, and the Senior Citizen Center gave us several boxes of fabric, and in those boxes were 20 blocks with this flower pattern on, but they had been seamed together, and if you've ever tried to do curved seams, it's about impossible. They did not lie flat, and they were not the same size or anything. So I took them home, and I didn't know what to do with them, but I ended up taking them all apart, and then I cut new pieces and appliqued them to a white block. So that's how they were when I got to Texas that year. And every Walmart we stopped at, I picked up a little more fabric to add a little more to the quilt. I started with the sashing between, and then I decided it needed something on the borders to make it fit a regular sized bed. So I did the flying geese blocks, and thank goodness Walmart always had a little more. But I call it my thrift quilt.
I don't know who the individual was that made this quilt. I am assuming she was a member of the American Legion Auxiliary in Buffalo, Wyoming. It was given to my father when he was living in the Veterans Home of Wyoming, and when he passed away, I got it.
Okay, there's 3 quilts back on the table back here, if you had a chance to see them. The one at the back in the dark colors belongs to Judy Wagner, and it was made by her great-grandmother. And she has some pictures there of her great-grandmother, and in one of the pictures, there's a picture of her great-grandmother holding one of Judy's little sisters. She's not sure when the quilt was made, but her great-grandmother was 101 years old when she died in 1954. So it must have been made sometime in the early 1900s. And it's made out of wool fabrics, probably from old wool suits. That was a pretty common fabric to use for the everyday quilts at that time. Then the 2 quilts next to that, they're actually just quilt tops, and they were done by my great-grandmother, Mom's grandmother, Minnie Herman. And Mom's conned me into, well, she asked me to come to the house one day, and she showed me the quilts tops that she'd been given, and asked if I would finish one of them for her. And I said yes, if I could have the other one. One of them is a bow tie quilt. Grandma Herman was, she didn't do beautiful, beautiful quilts. She made usable quilts made out of whatever old clothing or fabric was around. Because the fabric was already old, a lot of her quilts have not held up very well because the fabric was already old and weak. Mom said that Minnie quilted almost to the day she died, and I'm not sure how old she was. I've got a picture there, showing her sitting in a chair quilting, but Mom said that her son-in-law would thread the needle at the end because she couldn't see well enough to do it, so that's real dedication. Then in the hallway, you saw the 2 spectacular crazy quilts that we have hanging in the hallway. This closest one is Evelyn Hyde's, and it belonged to Chet's mother, Virgie, and it was made in 1900 by Mrs. Cook, and that's all she knows about it. But it is a beautiful quilt with some wonderful embroidery on it. The one next to it, Sherry, did you want to talk about that?
This is also from Dave's family, and it was made by his great-great-grandmother, and her name's Clara Norris Morris, and that was in 1885. And when she was just a young wife, she was pregnant with her first baby when she began the quilt. But the baby turned out to be twins, but unfortunately neither of them survived. But she continued working on the quilt as she recuperated. She did have 2 children later. It was a tradition in the late 1800s to make the crazy quilts. And on this one, if you noticed, it has a kind of a reddish ruffle around it. And she said that was, a popular thing to do at that time. But Clara loved to do embroidery, and she put a lot of embroidery in each of the crazy quilt pieces. And so Clara was Reverend Dave's mother's father's mother. So, and Cliff Morris, who is Dave's grandfather, was her first son. And then her daughter was born 2 years later. The daughter was named Lottie. But the family didn't have a middle name for her. So someone suggested they give her the name of the next person that would come down the road. But it happened to be Carl. And Carl was a town drunk. So her name was Lottie Carl Morris.
Years ago. And it's a wall hanging, and she knows I like camping. So the top blocks are Crazy Quilt, but they're in blue fabrics for the sky. And then down, working on down, you have the greens and the browns for the forest and everything. But it's got the frogs. You can see the eyes hiding in the forest.
That's cool.
And ducks swimming in the pond. The one on the quilt stand on past that was brought in by Doris Oden. And Doris, it was made by the senior citizens group and raffled off, and Doris won it in the raffle. Isn't that beautiful? Then there's two more as you come into the sanctuary right here. And the first one is another of Eileen Hooper's quilts, and it's the one made for Janelle Couture. And then the one next to it, I think, is yours, Sherry, isn't it?
Right. Again, from Dave's family. You want to tell about it?
This quilt was created by Lizzie Mormon Campbell in 1942. Lizzie was my father's aunt who, having no children of her own, left her estate to her youngest niece and nephew. My dad was, Bill Mormon, was that nephew. However, the families of the three older nephews went into the house after the funeral and took keepsakes and mementos and heirlooms. Fortunately, one of Bill's sisters-in-law saw this quilt, grabbed it, and gave it to him lest he receive nothing.
We'd like to thank everybody who very generously shared their treasures with us tonight. And I was asked if anybody would consider letting us keep their quilts hanging through Sunday. It's a Crazy Quilt Life. Most of us have old quilts made by a mother, or a grandmother, or a great-grandmother, or a daughter, or sister, or friend. They come in a variety of patterns, but one of the favorites was the Crazy Quilt. Some of them are quite beautiful, some of them are not. But each is full of a crazy quilt of memories, and we cherish them dearly. There's a piece from Grandma's favorite apron. Can't you just see her in her elbows, up to her elbows in flour as she kneads the bread? There's one of Grandpa's favorite shirts. Can't you still detect a scent of his Old Spice? The christening gown, which so many family babies were blessed in. Little dresses for birthdays and Easter and Christmas. Graduation robes, and the wedding dresses we sent our daughters out into life in. Gosh, there's even a piece from the first project Mom made in 4-H, and the dress she made for my first prom. It's so full of memories, special occasions, and everyday life all jumbled together.
A tattered quilt, all frayed and torn, beneath whose warmth a child once slept. A memory in each patch is kept from clothing long ago well worn. This cherished quilt brings back the touch that wiped away a tiny tear and softly rocked while giving cheer. Its sweet comfort always treasured much. Now generations feel the love of someone they have never known. The seeds of love forever sown by Grandma smiling from above.
The pieces are leftover scraps in odd shapes and sizes. Some nameless shapes have hooks and curves, long slivers of fabric painstakingly sewn with dozens of meticulous stitches. A few tiny patches are smaller than my thumbnail. Some of the fabric is very plain with dull colors. I can just hear some tired mother say, "But dear, it's a very serviceable cloth," while her daughter frowns at the new school dress. Other pieces are bright and cheery, like snippets of birthdays, summer vacations, and fun times gone by. A few fancier pieces are satiny smooth, with embossing or embroidery. They seem to whisper of weddings, dances, a first kiss. In some, the blocks are carefully planned out with matching colors. Some are haphazardly arranged and almost seem to shout at each other. Perhaps Great-Grandma was nearly blind and never realized what her creations looked like. Maybe she was simply going by touch. They have an interesting texture, smooth next to bumpy, seersucker alongside velvet, and all over the quilt, hundreds of tiny stitches, almost invisible to the eye, pucker ever so slightly.
Some women sewed these points and squares into a pattern like life's cares. Here's a velvet that was strong, the poplin that was wore so long, a fragment from her daughter's dress, like her, a vanished loveliness, old patches of such things as these, old garments and old memories, and what is life? The crazy quilt, sorrow and joy, and grace and guilt. With her and there a square blue, for some old happiness we knew. And so the hand of time will take the fragments of our lives and make, out of life's remnants as they fall, a thing of beauty after all.
As I study my crazy quilt, I think of the crazy quilt relationships in my life, of my family, and of the many friends I've been blessed with. Quilts can teach us a lot about our relationships, how much someone means to us, how we can love her. Just as quilts are made with special care and great attention to details, so are the relationships we nurture over time. Some of those relationships have felt a bit scratchy and rough, like a sturdy piece of wool, but in time they softened, or I became used to them. Others were delicate like silk and needed to be handled with care. Some were colorful and bright and great fun to be with. A few special others felt soft and cozy like flannel, and they knew how to make me feel better. Each one is unique, irreplaceable, priceless.
It's more than a coverlet, more than a spread. This beautiful quilt that graces my bed. It's laughter and sorrow. It's pleasure and pain. It's small bits and pieces of sunshine and rain. It's a bright panorama of scraps of my life. It's moments of glory. It's moments of strife. It's a story I cherish of the days that have been. It's a door I can open to live them again. Yes, it's more than a cover, this much treasured quilt. It's parts pieced together of the life I have built.
Each relationship, like each quilt, is full of flaws. The wrong color thread used here, a pucker in the seam there. Often you wonder why the maker didn't tear it out and start over. I'm sure our heavenly maker has had the thought cross his mind from time to time as he watches us flounder in our relationships. But like our quilts, our flaws are what make us unique. And even though each piece in our lives is different, when it's all put together, it's beautiful. Sewn together, each piece is stronger than when it's alone. And instead of mistakes, they become new stories woven into the fabric of our lives. Chapter 3 of Ecclesiastes says, "There is a time for everything, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to weep and to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance." Life and our relationships are full of those moments of joy and of loss, of moving on and coming back, an ebb and flow of love and memories. Family and friends may be lost to us through death or just moving on, but we carry the memory of them in our heart for life, a crazy patchwork of good times and bad, tears and laughter, so much love, so much pain. God has sewn them into our hearts.
Life is like a patchwork quilt, and each little patch is a day. Some patches are rosy, happy, and bright, and some are dark and gray. But each little patch, as it's fitted in and sewn to keep it together, makes a finished block in this life of ours, filled with sun and with rainy weather. So let me work on life's patchwork quilt through the rainy days and the sun, trusting that when I have finished my block, the master may say, "Well done."
As I pull my great-grandmother's old crazy quilt around me, I am comforted and warmed by my memories. I know my own masterpiece, my own crazy quilt of relationships, of family and friendship, of memories, is not nearly completed. Like my great-grandmother, blindly trusting her fingers to lead her, I will continue to work on it with love and with faith until I stand before my God and He tells me, "It is finished. Well done." Thank you, guys.
I'm telling you to sing this.